Welcome back, everyone. It has been 1 month since Trayvon Martin was shot to death by neighborhood watchman George ZImmerman. In that time, he has become the poster child for some very heated debate and some serious stereotypes in America and a rallying cry for change. Well, today, more details have come out about Trayvon and ZImmerman as people across the country are calling for justice. But Andrew, as we said here, is a long way to go before we finally see what a lot of people think should happen here. And we're learning more and more, maybe not exactly what happened that night, but some of the, let's say, the storylines that surround it.
Well, we have the broad strokes, the details of what actually happened that night coming out drip by drip, person by person, Rich, and the details of that shooting 1 month ago slowly trickling out. But in the end, many say this really isn't about Trayvon or ZImmerman or even that chance encounter that turned deadly, but rather about a feeling that different Americans experience different types of justice. In the months since 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was shot and killed in Sanford, Florida, his name, even his image,
all of those with hoodies stand,
have become rallying cries for justice. His killer, neighborhood watch captain George ZImmerman, has not been charged, though a grand jury will convene next month. ZImmerman claims self-defense and points to Florida's Stand Your Ground law as justification for the shooting.
What that means is that the state must go forward and be able to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt.
ZImmerman's attorney is also now speaking out, saying it was Trayvon and not his client who was the aggressor.
I think he's surprised of the magnitude of the way things have taken off. This has become a national issue over calling him a racist.
A friend, Joe Oliver, says ZImmerman pursued the teen because there had been a rash of break-ins in the neighborhood and not because Trayvon was black.
George had no intention of taking anybody's life. He cried for days after that happened.
News breaking today that at the time of the shooting, Martin had been suspended from school for 10 days for marijuana possession. Today, protests over the shooting were heard at this forum in Eatonville, Florida. All attendees were asked to donate $100 to Trayvon's family. And the demands that George ZImmerman be arrested, they continue.
They've killed my son, and now they're trying to kill his reputation.
ZImmerman's attorney also insists that the voice screaming for help that was heard in the 911 call that night is not Trayvon's as originally thought, but rather they say that voice belongs to George ZImmerman. Rich?
All right, Andrew, thank you. And I want to break our conversation into two parts. We'll talk about the Stand Your Ground law and the prosecution prospects coming up next segment. And obviously, I'm very happy we have a former prosecutor at a table to get into that. But I think the copy at the top really said it well, which is it's as if a Band-Aid was lifted up over a festering cut here. And I'm talking about race because I don't know where you guys have been the last few days, over the weekend. People have said it's not just about Trayvon. This issue about you are treated one way or the other depending on the color of your skin. We talked last week about the talk. Doesn't matter what I have on this table. If they're a person of color, they all talk about the conversation in their household with an adult or with their kids about the talk, about how if you are black, you're supposed to act or not around law enforcement, what you're not allowed to do if you're a person of color to avoid, and how the story even germinated. How the national press got around this. If you hear stories, it's about primarily reasons where people of color in newsrooms said, no, no, no. This story almost happened to me, or my nephew had this happen to him, or whatever. Not maybe a fatality, but Dominic, as much as we're talking about a kid that was killed 100 yards from his front door, this is a conversation that's been happening in water coolers for the last few weeks here, where people say, see it happen again.
Well, see, the problem starts, Richard, because normally it involves a law enforcement officer. Now, someone who is a self-proclaimed lawman can take the law into his own hands. And all that garbage about the self-defense laws in Florida, how can it be self-defense when you provoked the incident? 911 said, do not get involved, and you did it anyway. So how can that be self-defense? And you know why African Americans are angry, and my voice may be raising a little bit? Because the dead boy, his body was tested for drugs. But the suspect, the alleged suspect, who was slurring on the 911 tape, he hasn't been tested for drugs, to our knowledge, as of yet. Now, could it have anything to do with the fact that his father is a retired judge? Is that why he's not in police custody? This is why we're not stupid. The law is supposed to be equal for everyone. And you ask any African American, and if they're being honest with you, we'll normally give you the politically correct answer. Those of us that work in media or professors will tell you, oh, everything is equal. But when we're being honest, and certainly when we're talking amongst each other, nothing is equal, especially in the criminal justice system.
You know, as much as Dominic says it's not the law, it's the circumstances on the ground. If the positions were reversed, if it was a black man who was the neighborhood watch shooter, and it was a Hispanic or a white person who was the person who was shot, at least in theory, the way this law works, is supposed to happen the exact same way. Do I actually?
The African American might have been shot by the responding cops.
Do I actually?
Do we forget that black cops? I'm sorry, Andrew, but do we forget that black cops that are working on undercover have been shot numerous times in cities all across this region, and one was killed in Westchester, off duty.
Yes.
So
again, I'm not saying that doesn't happen.
Black man with a gun is a recipe for the coffin.
According to the law, the way it's written there, it's supposed to play out the exact same way, regardless of the positions. I'm also saying that I don't think it actually would play out that way, but at least technically it's supposed to.
Well,
so
we're going to get into law, but here's what I'm getting at, and I want to be careful how I say this. I get the idea that if there is not a perception that justice is achieved at the end of this case, this is one of those flashpoints where you have a lot of angry people in America. And I can tell you, people who don't follow the news are all following this case. They can tell you about the facts that surrounded this as much as we know at this point. Tom, I think that, I really think that, I hope there isn't political advantage. I know you weren't crazy about the president saying what he said at that time. I didn't have a problem with it, but I get the idea that you got a lot of people that this has been under the surface for a while. When this happened, they said, see, Exhibit A yet again. You got a lot of angry Americans right now.
Well, you know, I had hoped that after we elected an African-American president in this country, that I really thought that we were heading in a much better place for racial relations in this country. I understand that we are always, unfortunately, going to have, you know, skepticism by many on both sides of the issue. What seems to have happened here was a 17-year-old kid walking to his dad's house, confronted a man who should never have been where he was, shouldn't be carrying a gun by all accounts. I don't even know how the guy has a pistol permit. And something in a 2-minute period happened. Now, I don't know what happened there. And I have to have some belief in the system, and the scrutiny of this is unbelievable at this point, that I would just hope that the truth comes out. And if the truth is that this man murdered this young man, he gets to the ultimate death penalty, because that's what I believe in. But at this point, the stories as they're dripping out is not helping us as Americans get to some type of resolution that we really are clear as what happened. What happened at a point?
What, though? Here's what's dripping out. Today, a story comes out that at one point the young man was suspended because they had residue of marijuana in his bag.
Means
and
nothing.
Also, it doesn't.
It means
this
nothing.
also didn't mean nothing, but part of the hoodie movement that we saw over this weekend was because of this. Can I see that clip from Geraldo Rivera, guys? This was last, I believe it was Thursday or Friday, when he made this following comment about a hoodie, and that, of course, was what was worn by Trayvon Martin the night that he was shot. Take a listen.
But I am urging the parents of black and Latino youngsters particularly to not let their children go out wearing hoodies. I think the hoodie is as much responsible for Trayvon Martin's death as George ZImmerman was.
What do you mean?
When you see a kid walking, Juliet, when you see a kid walking down the street, particularly a dark-skinned kid like my son Cruz, who I constantly yelled at when he was going out wearing a damn hoodie or those pants around his ankles, take that hood off. People look at you and what do they think? What's the instant identification? What's the instant association?
You know what, Bennett? I hear that, and I hear people saying, before they realize just the possibility that the kid actually lived in that gated community here that, hey, what was Zimmerman to think? I'm like, the kid lived there. They're like, oh, he lived there? There's so much baggage that went into that night before that guy pulled the trigger that we confused the facts. You've worked cases before. The kid was going home with Skittles and a drink in his pocket. A guy who was told to get nowhere near the kid and wait for the authorities took it upon himself with a gun in his holster, and the kid ended up with a bullet in his chest and dead. It's not more complicated than that, is it?
It's a simple, it's not. Let me just say this. I was a prosecutor for 10 years. Self-defense oftentimes is a difficult defense to rebut as a prosecutor. But let me just explain the elements of self-defense, because the stand your ground part of this law has really nothing to do with this. All the stand your ground law means is that you don't have to retreat. You can stand your ground, and if somebody is attacking you, if somebody is threatening you with deadly force, you're allowed to respond with deadly force. You don't have to retreat. Common law and in New York,
the incident,
but
right?
obviously you can initiate, and obviously you can pursue the person and then claim self-defense. Zimmerman is following this kid. He's pursuing him. He's pursuing his quarry. And the police tell him, don't go. Stay back. We'll take care of it. We've got it under hand. You know, self-defense, the moment that Zimmerman fired his gun, he has to be able to prove, at least put in evidence, that at that moment when he fired his gun, he was reasonably in fear of being killed himself.
Can I ask a question?
You can certainly ask that question. We're going to jump to break.